The forest near Salerno was still burning when the German patrol arrived. It was late November, 1943, a thin winter sun barely piercing through the mist. Smoke drifted low across the mud, clinging to boots, helmets, and fear. Sergeant Eric Brandt motioned his men forward, rifles raised. They expected traps, mines, maybe wounded Americans still breathing among the trees. Instead, what they found was stranger, a smell that did not belong to war. From the charred remnants of a U.S. position came the scent of beef stew mixed with roasted coffee. The air shimmered with the warmth of something human. Private Franz Keller, 23, a farm boy from Hesse, froze mid-step. He inhaled again, his cracked lips trembling. "I smell peace," he murmured. No one laughed. Before them stood an American field kitchen, its steel drums still radiating heat. A pot of stew had boiled over, the fat forming small golden pools on the ground. Bread, half burnt, lay scattered near a coffee urn that hissed softly, as if refusing to surrender to the silence. Around it, cartridge cases and torn bandages marked the quick retreat of the cooks who had fled minutes before the German counterpush. Brandt bent down, dipped a tin cup into the stew, and tasted. The flavor was simple, thick with potatoes and meat, but it tasted of order, of a machine that kept moving even when the front collapsed. He turned to his men. "They eat like civilians," he said. "They fight, and yet they eat like home." The scene defied everything the soldiers had been taught. For months, the Wehrmacht had been surviving on cold bread and horse meat. The official rations promised 3,000 calories per man, but by autumn of 43, most received less than half. Supply horses had died on the road from Naples, and field kitchens were often left miles behind the front. In contrast, this American contraption seemed born to follow the battle itself, on wheels, armored, against chaos. In that single smell, they sensed the difference between a nation fighting for domination and one fighting to preserve normalcy. Somewhere behind those fleeing Americans were factories that could replace every spoon, every pot, every loaf. Brandt did not know the numbers, how the U.S. produced over 15 million field rations a day by 1943, or how 2,500 mobile kitchens crossed Europe within months of D-Day. But he could feel the weight of it in his hands. The warmth was proof. Private Keller took a piece of bread, still soft at the center. "Even their crumbs are warm," he whispered. He thought of his mother's kitchen back home, of soup simmering while snow pressed against the window. For a heartbeat, the war seemed far away. He looked around at the trees, at the bodies, at the steam rising into the cold air. "If there is a heaven," he said quietly, "it must smell like this." That evening, when the sun bled out over the Italian hills, the field kitchen still steamed. The German unit camped nearby, too wary to eat more but unable to walk away. Some wrote in their diaries about the strange encounter, how the Americans bring the village with them. One noted, "Their strength is not the gun, it's the comfort." As night fell, the fire inside the pots cooled and died, leaving only scent and memory. The wind carried the smell down the valley, mixing with the smoke of burning tanks and pine wood. The forest no longer sounded like war. It sounded like a kitchen closing for the night. If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Somewhere, another fire once smelled like home. By morning, frost had settled over the abandoned field kitchen. The metal drums glistened, and a faint sweetness lingered in the air, the residue of burnt onions and coffee grounds. The Germans gathered around it again, studying its shape like archaeologists around a relic from another civilization. Corporal Heinrich Mader crouched to inspect the wheels. "This thing can move faster than we can march," he said, tapping the thick rubber tires. He wasn't wrong. The American M1937 mobile field kitchen could travel at the same pace as a tank column, boiling soup while moving over rough terrain. 2 gasoline burners could heat 80 liters of food each, and its insulated containers kept meals hot for 6 hours. Every U.S. infantry division had dozens of them, accompanied by supply trucks carrying flour, meat, and coffee. In contrast, the German soldiers depended on horse carts and wood-burning stoves. By 1943, the Wehrmacht supply system was collapsing under Allied air raids. A report from the 26th Panzer Division recorded that half of the field kitchens never reached the front, stranded for lack of fuel or horses. Soldiers often ate hard biscuits soaked in melted snow. The difference was more than mechanical. It was psychological. A fed soldier fought with conviction. A hungry one fought out of desperation. Sergeant Brandt realized this as he examined the welded pipes running from the American kitchen to its small fuel tank. "They bring the warmth with them," he muttered. "We chase it and never catch up." Around them, the forest began to thaw under the weak Italian sun. Mader and 2 others tried to ignite the burners again. A hiss, then a cough, and suddenly a flame burst out, startling them. The men laughed for the first time in weeks. From a broken pot, Keller spooned up what remained of the stew, barely enough for 3 men. They shared it in silence, embarrassed by how good it tasted. That day, Brandt's unit advanced only a few kilometers, but they carried something heavier than equipment, a realization that their enemy was not just stronger, but more organized, more nourished, more human. They cook as they fight, Keller wrote later. Quick, efficient, together. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps had refined what it called the kitchen that marches. From Tunisia to Sicily to Italy, its goal was simple. Every soldier should eat a hot meal at least once a day, no matter where the front line moved. To achieve that, the Americans built over 100,000 insulated containers and standardized recipes that could be reproduced anywhere in the world. In one photograph taken in Naples, a column of mobile kitchens stretches for half a mile, each one a small factory of comfort on wheels. The Germans who captured one could only stare. It wasn't just metal and flame. It was strategy, morale, and the illusion of home. When Brandt reported his find to headquarters, the response was indifferent. Destroy it after inspection. But that night, none of the men wanted to obey. They cleaned the soot, polished the steel, and sat near it as if guarding a shrine. Whoever feeds faster wins first, Matter said. He was right. By 1944, U.S. logistics would move faster than bullets. Meals marching ahead of tanks, coffee keeping pace with convoys, and warm bread crossing oceans. What began as a kitchen had become a weapon of spirit. As the flames flickered against their faces, Keller whispered, "Maybe war isn't just about who kills better. Maybe it's about who cares better." In the silence that followed, the stove crackled once, sending up a small spark that vanished into the dawn. A quiet prophecy written in fire. When the Americans finally counterattacked days later, the battle left behind more prisoners than corpses. Among them was Private First Class Thomas Riley, age 24, a cook from Cincinnati. He was captured, still wearing his white apron, now smudged with soot and blood, clutching a ladle as though it were a weapon. The Germans herded him into a barn near Eboli, where Sergeant Eric Brandt questioned him through an interpreter. Riley stood straight, eyes steady. When asked what his rank and duty were, he said, "Cook, 36th Infantry Division." Brandt sneered. "A cook? Then why fight?" Riley's reply came without hesitation. "My job isn't to kill anyone. My job is to keep them warm." The room fell silent. No one laughed. Later, in his diary, Brandt wrote, "He spoke like an officer, not in tone, but in certainty." To the Germans, a cook was a servant, invisible on the battlefield. To the Americans, he was a guardian of morale, part of the chain that kept an army alive. That night, in the captured barn, the German guards shared a cigarette with Riley. He told them about his kitchen truck back home, how it was named Martha, after his mother's diner in Ohio. He laughed softly, describing how his sergeant once scolded him for serving mashed potatoes too thick. "Says it could stop a bullet." The guards smiled reluctantly. For a brief moment, the language barrier dissolved. Outside, the rain began again, tapping on the tin roof like distant artillery. Brandt sat apart, listening. He remembered his own mother stirring soup in a pot during the hunger winter of 1942. He thought of his wife, who had written last month that she queued 6 hours for bread. Riley, meanwhile, leaned against the wall and began humming a tune. Something slow, American, half lullaby, half hymn. The melody reached the German sergeant like a ghost from another world. At dawn, Riley was marched with other prisoners toward Salerno for processing. Before leaving, he handed Brandt a folded slip of paper, a recipe written in pencil. "Beef stew for 200 men, it began, listing exact weights, temperatures, and the final line. "Serve hot, even in hell." Weeks later, that note would circulate secretly among the German soldiers, copied into notebooks like a superstition. One young lieutenant remarked, "He cooks with mathematics." Another replied, "No, he cooks with faith." In the war's great machinery, Riley was one of tens of thousands of U.S. Army cooks, trained not just to feed, but to endure. The Quartermaster Corps estimated that by mid-1944, over 2,000 new cooks graduated each month from American training bases, enough to supply every front with warmth in a world gone cold. Historians would later write that food became the most underrated weapon of the Allied arsenal. But for Brandt, it wasn't theory, it was revelation. He began to notice how American supply trucks, even when ambushed, carried coffee pots, sugar tins, and cans of fruit. Comfort was part of combat. A week after Riley's capture, Brandt's unit received orders to retreat again. The soldiers dismantled their temporary camp, but before leaving, they cleaned and reassembled the same American field kitchen they had found earlier. Brandt told Keller, "Let it burn one more time." The flames roared alive, and for a few moments, it wasn't war anymore. The men warmed their hands, the fire reflecting in their eyes. Nobody spoke. They all remembered the American who said, "My job is to keep them warm." When they finally moved out, the kitchen still glowed in the distance, its smoke drifting upward like a prayer for men who no longer knew which side warmth belonged to. Snow fell in thick silence over the Ardennes forest, muffling the sound of war. It was December 1944, the height of the Battle of the Bulge. The German counteroffensive had cut deep into Allied lines, and the temperature dropped below -10 degrees Celsius. The sky hung low, gray as steel. For miles, nothing moved but smoke. And yet, from one ridge came an impossible sight. American soldiers huddled around steaming pots. Their field kitchens, small, squat trailers hitched to jeeps, stood half buried in snow, fire flickering beneath metal grates. Shells burst in the distance, shaking branches, but the men did not scatter. They stirred soup, ladled it into cups, and laughed. One of them shouted, "Hot chow in a cold hell!" Across the ravine, German scouts watched in disbelief. Private Keller, now thinner and older than the man who once found that first American kitchen, lay behind a frozen log. He wrote in his notebook, "We freeze while they eat." His fingers bled through his gloves, but he couldn't stop writing. "We are soldiers of hunger. They are soldiers of comfort." Every man in his unit knew the hunger too well. Wehrmacht records from December 19th noted that field kitchens lost contact with frontline companies for 5 consecutive days. Bread froze solid, and tin rations cracked when struck against helmets. Yet the Americans somehow kept the steam alive. Behind every platoon was a kitchen. Behind every kitchen, a convoy of fuel. Behind every convoy, an army of engineers clearing roads through ice. It was a miracle built from planning, not faith. Sergeant Brandt stared through binoculars. He saw one American soldier crouched to shield a flame with his body, risking death for soup. The image burned into him. "They fight fear with fire," he whispered. "Their courage smells like broth." That evening, the Germans made a desperate attempt to attack the American position, hoping to cut off their supply route. The battle raged through the night. In the morning, Keller found himself lying near the same ridge, half buried in snow. His ears rang with silence. He could see the shattered remains of the American kitchen, holes through the steel drums, flames long dead. Yet, when he crawled closer, he found the soup inside still warm. He dipped his hand in and began to cry. In his diary, later recovered by U.S. troops, Keller had written, "We thought courage was in shouting and marching. They found it in eating hot soup when the sky fell." During that same week, U.S. Army records showed that over 3.5 million hot meals were served in the European theater, despite the blizzard. The Quartermaster Corps rerouted 1,200 fuel trucks and 400 kitchen trailers to ensure that every frontline unit received at least one warm ration per day. It was logistics as defiance. The Germans advanced with tanks. The Americans advanced with soup. When Brandt was finally captured in January, he was half-starved. At his processing camp, a U.S. cook handed him a tin bowl filled with beef stew and said simply, "Eat." Brandt looked down at the steam rising from the bowl and remembered the soldier he had once interrogated, the one who said, "My job is to keep them warm." He lifted the spoon to his lips. The first taste was salt and shame. The second was silence. Outside, snow kept falling, soft as ashes. Somewhere in the distance, another kitchen fire burned. The war continued, but warmth, once again, refused to surrender. By the spring of 1945, the war had shifted west. The Americans were crossing the Rhine. The Germans were running out of breath, bullets, and belief. For thousands of captured Wehrmacht soldiers, the world shrank to fences and barracks, to soup lines and watchtowers. Yet what awaited them inside those American prison camps was not vengeance. It was food. At Camp Swift, Texas, Sergeant Eric Brandt and Private Franz Keller found themselves among 8,000 other German prisoners. The camp stretched over 3,000 acres, lined with barbed wire, wooden huts, and the faint hum of distant trains. The heat was unbearable. But what astonished them most was the smell. The same smell they had once followed through a forest in Italy. It was stew again. Every day, trucks from nearby Austin delivered meat, beans, vegetables, and milk. The prisoners watched as American cooks, many of them black and Mexican, unloaded crates marked with the emblem of the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps. Inside each barrack stood a chalkboard with the day's menu written in English. Breakfast, oatmeal, bread, coffee. Lunch, soup, pork, cabbage. Dinner, beans, cornbread, coffee. Brandt noted in his journal, "It is more food than our families see in a month." Keller wrote home, "They feed us like men, not enemies." What shocked them further was the equality. Every man in camp, regardless of rank, stood in the same line. A colonel received the same portion as a private. Even the American guards ate identical meals from the same kitchen. In Germany, that would have been unthinkable. "They eat at one table," Brandt murmured one afternoon, watching the cooks and guards share a laugh over a spilled pot. That sight planted something dangerous in the prisoners' minds, a question. If a nation could feed its enemies, what else could it do differently? Around the mess hall, debates began. Some argued it was propaganda. Others said it was strength disguised as kindness. One cynical sergeant whispered, "They want to make us soft." But Keller replied, "Maybe they want to make us human again." The gossip of the camp spread faster than rumors of peace. Some claimed that American prisoners in Germany were starving, that this generosity was a trick. But when the Red Cross visits confirmed the rations and medical care, disbelief turned into uneasy respect. The daily calorie count, 2,800 per man, was higher than what most German civilians received in 1945. One day, a young cook named Miguel Torres approached the fence holding a tray. He waved to Keller, offering a biscuit. "Try it," he said in broken German. Keller hesitated, then took it. It was sweet, soft, warm. Miguel grinned. Texas bread, he said. That night, Keller couldn't sleep. He kept thinking of the cook's smile, the casual kindness that needed no victory speech. The war is ending, Brandt said quietly. But something else is beginning. Maybe we are the ones being rebuilt. Letters home became gentler. Some POWs even included American recipes. Keller's last note to his mother read, "They eat together, laugh together. They even let us taste peace before peace arrives." If you had lived through that reversal, if the men you once called enemies offered you warmth, what would you have felt? Would pride survive, or would hunger win? By the summer of 1945, the war in Europe was finished, but the lessons of hunger were not. Across the American camps in Texas, I ever conquer hate itself. Tell me, what do you believe truly wins a war? The army that destroys, or the one that feeds? 15 years later, in 1960, an old man in Stuttgart sat at his kitchen table polishing a dented Ska seemed to feed an army. In the distance, he could see black workers driving tractors beside German prisoners, all under the same blistering sun. The difference was that the Americans smiled. In the mess tent, the meals kept coming. Rice pudding, cornbread, fried potatoes, coffee, thick as oil. Brandt wrote in his journal, "It is hard to hate a nation that feeds you like this." Keller, sitting beside him, joked that the war had simply moved from guns to recipes. But beneath the humor was a slow transformation. The Germans began to understand logistics, not as a word for supply, but as a philosophy of equality. Every plate filled was a quiet demonstration of democracy. During one inspection, a U.S. quartermaster officer addressed the German laborers through an interpreter. "In this country, no soldier fights hungry. That's our rule." The words carried more weight than any propaganda leaflet. They revealed why the Americans had never starved, even in chaos. By 1945, the United States Army had delivered over 11 billion pounds of food across oceans, mountains, and bombed-out railways. They called it Operation Sustenance. To the prisoners, it looked like civilization in motion. One afternoon, Miguel Torres, the same young cook from the fence, waved Brandt over. He handed him a slice of pie and said, "Cherry, my mother's recipe." Brandt took a bite and felt something collapse inside. An old pride, perhaps, or the wall between conqueror and conquered. "You could end all wars with food like this," he said softly. Miguel laughed. "Then we'd be out of jobs." That evening, a silver-colored spoon. The edge was scratched, the bowl slightly bent, but it caught the afternoon light like a mirror. The man was Erich Brandt, once a sergeant of the Wehrmacht, now a retired railway clerk. On the back of that spoon, faint letters still read, U.S. Army, property. Every Sunday, he set it beside his plate out of habit. His wife used to tease him for it until he explained what it meant. "The spoon," he said, "fed me when my country couldn't." It was the only souvenir he had kept from the war, picked up from an abandoned American kitchen outside Salerno in 1943, the same one that had first made him taste warmth amid death. Sometimes he would tell the story to his neighbors over coffee. They would nod politely, not understanding. But his son, a boy of 12, always listened closely. Brandt would describe how the Americans had cooked even under fire, how the smell of stew had traveled farther than bullets. "We lost the war," he'd say, "the day we realized they fed their men better than we fed our wounded." That spoon, for him, became a relic of clarity. It represented the moment he understood that industrial might was not only about tanks and planes, it was about Morocco and Kansas. Thousands of German prisoners now worked in fields, canneries, and warehouses. The weapons were gone, replaced by shovels and sacks of grain. The same men who had once captured an American field kitchen were now serving behind one. Sergeant Erich Brandt, assigned to a prisoner work detail, helped unload crates of canned fruit for local farmers. He read the stenciled labels, Chicago, St. Louis, Pittsburgh, and realized that every town in America, as the sky turned copper over the Texas plain, Keller and Brandt sat outside the barracks watching fireflies. Around them, prisoners played cards, sang, argued about recipes, even traded letters with local farmers' families. They were still captives, but the fences had lost their sting. For the first time, Keller spoke about returning home. "When I go back," he said, "I'll build a small kitchen in the garden. No flags, no orders, just the smell of soup." Brandt smiled. "And if someone asks who taught you that?" Keller shrugged. "An enemy." Food had become more than nourishment. It was an education, a quiet diplomacy of kindness. The war had proved that ideology could starve, but compassion could feed. If comfort could cross a fence, if a spoon could outlast a rifle, could warmth